Thank you very much, Dr. Agnihotri. In fact, I had the opportunity to visit IHC system a few days ago. I was presenting at IREDA, and we also had Mr. Kushagra who actually installed that system, so we could go and see that system. So it's a wonderful system. I must tell you that. Uh, yeah. So my presentation, I'll just skip through a few slides, which would be redundant. But there are one or two messages that I would like to give at the end of my presentation. As gentleman from GIZ said, that capacity building is very much required when we talk about rooftop PV. So this is a capacity building that I'm talking about from the utilities perspective. We have different mechanisms, to implement rooftop solar PV, but the commercial impact of these two mechanisms are different for different utilities. I'll be showing that in my slides. And it is very much required that either MNRE or maybe CRC should come out with a tool which should help utilities to select a better mechanism for them. I'm not saying any mechanism is less than other, be it gross metering or net metering, but for a specific utility, they may have to first evaluate which mechanism will be better for them in the long-term perspective. Just to mention about PwC, it is one of the largest professional services firm providing audit, tax, and advisory services. I'm part of advisory services, specifically in renewable and energy efficiency domain. So solar rooftop, we all mean as a system which is basically installed on the rooftop of any building. There could be three uses for that. One is the standalone mode, that is to meet the captive consumption. The other, while using the grid-tied inverter, could be a mechanism in which if we foresee net metering to come in future, we can install grid-tied inverter. And a hybrid inverter has an advantage over grid-tied inverter. If it is connected to the grid and even if grid is not available, it can work in the oscillated mode. So you can have both the benefits. While the system is connected to the grid, it can feed to the grid. If grid is not available, you can use the generation in a captive mode. We definitely have advantages of solar rooftop, and these are over and above ground-mounted systems, starting from low gestation period. Social, which is very important when we talk about ground-mounted system, land acquisition sometimes become a very big hurdle. We also have technical and commercial benefits in terms of we do not have to transmit electricity over large transmission and distribution systems, so we actually save on electricity losses, as well as it provides us the commercial benefits to the utility in the long term. To talk about solar PV scale-up plan, yes, we all know 100 gigawatt has to be achieved, and out of that 40% has to come from the rooftop PV systems, which seems to be quite ambitious, but if I have to look at the amount of energy that this 40 gigawatt will be generating around in year 2022, it will be just 3 to 4% of the overall energy requirement. So yeah, a 40 gigawatt as a number seems quite high, but for a country like India, it is not very high. And to talk about the breakup of that 40 gigawatt, we do anticipate that around 27 gigawatt should come on industrial and institutional or commercial buildings. And this is one specific category which can get benefit from IREDA's new financing scheme, which will have financing terms better than the market rates. For the housing sector, again, MNRE has also done a very good initiative. It has requested many public sector banks to include the housing rooftop system under the housing loan or housing improvement loan. So that is again a very good initiative. So talk about the mechanisms. We have two implementation mechanisms of rooftop PV. One is the cross metering. This is a feed-in tariff mechanism which has been followed in Germany and one of the successful one. Basically, in this, the consumer who leases his rooftop doesn't utilize the energy, and all the energy is being fed to the grid after signing a PPA with the utility. So utility has the benefit that it can pass on the FIT, which is preferential tariff, at least in Indian context nowadays. It can actually pass it through the ARR, which is the average revenue requirement filing, which every DISCOM has to do. So the higher cost of solar is being divided among all the consumers of the utility. Whereas in the net metering, it is more of self-consumption mode. First, you utilize the energy at your house or your building, and if you have any excess energy, that can be fed to the grid. Now here's a catch. Not all the regulations in India, not all the states have allowed any tariff or any commercial adjustment of the energy that is excess energy that is being fed to the grid. So you may have a case where you have a school or an institution which is not running on Saturday and Sunday, energy is being generated, which is being fed to the grid without any commercial adjustments. So these are the kind of things that one need to consider while connecting a system as under a net metering scheme. And one of the another catch point here is in the long term, utility is actually selling less number of units because of course mostly commercial and institutional consumers are going away from the utility. Just a comparison, I'll just talk about the utilities and developers concern. In the cross metering mechanism, utility has a concern that it cannot actually sign PPA with every household or every building owner, which is a big thing. You cannot have so many contractual agreements. Whereas in the net metering, the utility concern is it is a loss of revenue for them. We all know in India it is commercial. The commercial and industrial consumers provide most of the revenue to the utilities. So if your commercial and industrial consumers are going out of the loop, there is definitely a loss of revenue for the utility. To talk about developers' concern in the cross metering mechanism, and Ashish can throw light on that later. If the grid is unavailable, your system is not working. As in, because your system is connected to the grid, and we have load shedding in India. If your grid is not available, basically it's a wastage of your system. Your system is not being utilized to what capacity it can utilize otherwise. And in the net metering, yes, you could have a case when, again, I'm saying when, again, the excess energy that is fed to the grid is not being commercially adjusted, then you have very low incentive, which has to be, shared between the household owner and the project developer. Just to give an international experience, and Mr. Dr. Winfried from GIZ already elaborated it. Germany is the leader as far as solar is concerned. What is important here to understand is that most of these countries which are doing really good in solar, they have a very fairly good share of rooftop PV. So when we say we want to do our solar scale up with 40% share coming from the rooftop PV, this is not something which only we have thought through, but these countries have already thought through. To talk about mechanism, Germany is largely cross-metering. They have just shifted to giving subsidies from battery after they have reached the grid parity. We still have grid parity 2 to 3 years away from us in India. US has been historically following net metering mechanism, but they have also shifted to the cross-metering. Japan is a classic example, which started with the net metering. It could not achieve its targets, and then they moved to cross-metering. And this is what had happened to them. After they moved to the cross-metering, they could actually install a lot of utility-scale projects. Developers were fine with the clear revenue stream under the cross-metering mechanism, and a lot of investments came in, and Japan also took off. So Japan added some 7 gigawatt in last year, which is a huge quantity to be added in a year. So they have actually followed the model which was followed in Germany earlier. To talk about Indian perspective, we started off a lot of off-grid projects because of JNNSM 30% subsidy scheme. Then we have started moving to grid connected also, while a lot of regulations have come up. Mostly on net metering, we have to be really cautious about that thing. We first need to check whether that is the right way to do or not. We have also tested a few PPP projects in various states. I'll be just telling you about these projects. So first one was a very successful case, which was in Gandhinagar. Again, it was in a cross-metering mechanism. When we say PPP, 80% of the buildings were provided from the public sector, from the government sector. Rest 20% were from the private sector. Important point to catch here is that there was a benefit that was provided to rooftop owner. I'm talking about a cross-metering case in which a rooftop owner doesn't get energy to be consumed at his premises. So he needs something while to give his rooftop. Whereas in other cases which were not that successful, like Gandhinagar, the rooftop owners were not provided any incentive, no benefits were there. And the result was that in second case, which was planned to be 25 megawatt, only one bid came for 5 megawatt. In Madhya Pradesh, it was with GIZ only. We did this project with GIZ. It was planned for 5 megawatt, but at the end, the government declined to give rooftop, and only 2 megawatt could be bid out. The Odisha case is still not a successful one because DISCOMs have their reluctance over net meter standards. So my point here is, while you're going for the cross-metering mechanism, it is very important that the rooftop owners are provided some kind of benefits. At the same time, we do need to consider the cash flow on the distribution utility, because if distribution utility is smart enough and it works out that the net metering or the cross metering mechanism is not working in the long term, it may prefer the other one. I'll be just coming on that. So my point here is a utility specific assessment is required. So we have done some preliminary analysis for two utilities, and why we are saying that it is very important that utilities must be concerned that we know uh, the financial losses that the utilities are making in this country is being increasing again every year. This is the cost structure for a distribution utility. You have most of the cost coming from the power purchase, but there are other costs also, which are the fixed cost. It includes your employee cost, your administration, and other costs. Depending upon how these costs are increasing, it is very important that a utility just check in the long-term perspective, whether 25 or 30 years from now, what would be the structure of their cost, whether it will be again APPC having the larger share or APPC share will be declining in the future. So what we have seen that in most cases, it may happen that APPC share will be declining with more and more renewable coming into their portfolio, because your fuel-based cost of generation will be always increasing, but your renewable catching up there and increasing its share will give a decreasing trend on the APPC. So we generally see a conflict in the net metering mechanism between the consumer and the distribution utility, and this is shown here. So we have the known domestic consumers, which includes both commercial and industrial consumer, which actually provide the revenue for the distribution utility. If we have to see the ratio of your average revenue realized per unit over your average cost of supply, it is greater than 1 for the utility in this range. And this is only the range where your tariff is more than 7, and this consumer would like to go away from the utility. So this is the kind of conflict we have in the net metering system. What we have done is we have now compared to utilities UHPVN and BSES. We have extrapolated their CAGR of, we have extrapolated their APPC, which is average power purchase cost, and the other costs. In both the cases, the CAGR of APPC is lower than that of other costs. So what happens in the long term, you see that with the cross metering, your average cost of supply tend to decrease. Whereas with the net metering, this is not the case. But with the net metering, of course, you have other benefits also. We actually adjust all these benefits. What we have found is, while talking about two different utilities, one is the UHBVN, which is in Haryana, and the other one is in BSES. For UHBVN, it was cross metering that is more favorable for the utility. It is in terms of the cash saving, and mind you, in both the cases, utility is actually saving money in the long term. But with which mechanism they are saving more money is more important from the utilities perspective. Whereas for the BSES, it is the net metering where they'll be saving more. So a utility specific tool, a policy selection tool must be created. Maybe MNRE can pursue that. These are the critical factors that need to be considered while designing a rooftop policy or planning for any state. Just completing. So these are the different, because the panel is more on the opportunities, so these are the different business models that a private player can look for into. I'm talking about third-party owned models. It is, as I said, it can be off-grid model, gross metering and net metering. Both in gross and net metering, you can actually have an individual system like in IHC, which is a single owner, or you can have combined systems also. Like in gross metering, the Kantinagar PPP is one example. More than 50, 60 roofs of 25, 30 consumers were utilized there. And Odisha PPP project in the net metering was also one of the case. So if you combine the roofs, you have a larger scale, and developers will be more interested to come in these kind of projects. ESCO mode is one of the emerging mode where you can sign the private PPAs like IHC has done with the private consumer. These are the key points that needs to be considered during those PPAs. Thank you.